My name is Grant Holloway, and 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good enough, or so I told myself. I had a steady job as a systems analyst, sitting in a cubicle all day, crunching numbers and fixing code. It wasn't the kind of work that made people jealous, but it paid the bills and kept the lights on. My wife, Celeste, was the real star in our little world. She had this way about her, bright, beautiful, sharp as a tack. People couldn't help but notice her when she walked into her room, and I always felt a little proud that she picked me. Her parents, Marjorie and Cliff, lived just a few miles away, and they were always around, popping into our house like they owned it. I didn't mind too much at first. They were family, after all. Then there was my younger brother, Callum. He used to be the golden kid, smart, athletic, the one everyone said would go far. But somewhere along the way, he lost it all, dropped out of college, bounced between jobs, and ended up on our couch. I let him stay because he's my brother, and I figured I was doing the right thing by helping him get back on his feet. That's what family does, right? You take care of each other. At least, that's what I believed back then. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. I didn't notice the little things, the way Celeste and her parents would share quick glances when they thought I wasn't looking, or how Callum seemed to linger around her a bit too long when he said goodnight. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. I mean, why would I suspect anything? These were the people I trusted most in the world. My wife, my in-laws, my own flesh and blood, they were supposed to have my back. Instead, I was the fool feeding a nest of snakes, and I didn't even know it. Every day, I'd come home from work, tired but content, thinking I was building something solid with them. I'd cook dinner sometimes, sit with Celeste on the couch watching TV, laugh at Marjorie's stories about her book club, and toss Callum a few bucks when he said he was short. It felt normal, like the life I'd always wanted. But under the surface, something was rotting, and I was too blind to smell it. I remember one night in particular, about a month before everything changed. We were all sitting around the dinner table, me, Celeste, Marjorie, Cliff, and Callum. I'd made spaghetti, nothing fancy, just something to fill our stomachs. The conversation was light, mostly Marjorie going on about some neighbor's new car. I cracked a joke about how I'd stick with my beat-up Toyota forever, and everyone laughed. But then Callum said something under his breath, too quiet for me to catch, and Celeste smirked. It was quick, gone in a second, but it stuck with me. I asked what he'd said, and he just shrugged, shoving a forkful of pasta into his mouth. Nothing, man, just messing around, he mumbled. Celeste squeezed my hand under the table, her fingers warm against mine, and I let it go. I didn't want to be the guy who overthinks everything, you know? I wanted to trust them. So I smiled, took another bite, and ignored the tiny knot forming in my gut. That knot would grow, though. It would twist and tighten until it was all I could feel. But that night, I pushed it down, telling myself I was being paranoid. These were my people, my family. What could they possibly be hiding? The truth is, I didn't want to see it. I built my whole life around them, around us. Celeste and I had been married for 5 years, and sure, we had our ups and downs, but I thought we were solid. Her parents treated me like a son, or so I thought, and Callum was my little brother, the kid I'd always looked out for. I didn't have a big circle, work kept me busy, and I'd never been great at making friends, so they were my everything. I'd sit there at night, after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling grateful. Grateful for a wife who still kissed me goodnight, for in-laws who cared enough to check in, for a brother who needed me. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Or at least, I thought it was. Now, looking back, I can see the cracks, how Celeste would stay up late texting someone she wouldn't name, how Marjorie's smiles never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me, how Callum's, "Thanks, bro," started sounding hollow. I didn't know it then, but I was living with vipers, and they were already coiling around me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It's funny how you can convince yourself everything's fine when it's not. I'd tell myself I was lucky, that I had a good thing going. I'd ignore the late-night whispers I'd hear through the walls, the way Cliff would change the subject whenever I asked about their plans. I'd brush off the fact that Callum never seemed to be in a hurry to leave, even though he'd been with us for months. I wanted to believe in them so badly that I didn't see what was right in front of me. But that was 3 years ago, before the trip, before the chapel, before the red paint and the recorder. Back then, I was just Grant Holloway, the guy who thought he had a perfect little life. I didn't know I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall, or that the people I loved most were the ones who'd push me. I'll never forget the day Celeste brought up the idea of a family vacation to Hawaii. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd just gotten home from work, my tie loosened and my laptop bag slung over the couch. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked up at me with those big, bright eyes of hers and said, "Grant, what if we all went to Hawaii? You know, me, you, Mom, Dad, Callum, just get away for a bit." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, like she really needed me to say yes. I stood there, leaning against the counter, watching her dice carrots with that quick, graceful way she had. "We need this," she added, brushing her hand against mine as she reached for the salt. "Time to unwind." I felt her fingers linger on my skin, warm and familiar, and for a second, I wanted to believe her. A trip to paradise, sun, sand, maybe a cold drink with one of those little umbrellas sounded like it could fix things. Not that I'd admitted anything was broken, but lately, there'd been this tension in the house I couldn't quite name. Maybe I was just tired from work, or maybe it was Callum still sleeping on our couch after all these months. Whatever it was, her touch and that hopeful look in her eyes made me think she was right. Maybe we did need this. Still, I wasn't sold right away. Money was tight, not desperate, but tight. I made decent cash as a systems analyst, but it wasn't like we were swimming in extra. "Hawaii's not cheap, Celeste," I said, scratching the back of my neck. "Flights, hotel, food, it adds up." She smiled, that dazzling smile that always got me, and said, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out. It'll be worth it." I should have asked more questions, like how we'd figure it out, or why she was so set on it. But I didn't. Cliff and Marjorie were over the next day, and when Celeste told them, they lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Oh, Grant, that's a marvelous idea." Marjorie clapped her hands together, her bracelets jangling. Cliff nodded, puffing on his pipe, saying, "About time we all did something fun." I didn't bother correcting them that it was Celeste's idea, not mine. They were so excited, and I didn't want to be the guy who ruined it. Then there was Callum. He was sprawled on the recliner, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when Celeste mentioned the trip. "Cool," he muttered, like it was no big deal. I figured he'd bow out. After all, he hadn't paid rent in months, and I'd been covering his groceries half the time. But then Celeste said, "We've got your ticket covered, Cal," and my stomach did a little flip. Who's we? I wondered. Turned out, it was mostly me. I ended up footing the bill for almost everything. Flights for 5, a week at some fancy oceanfront resort, rental car. I watched my savings account shrink with every click of the confirm payment button. Celeste chipped in a little from her part-time graphic design gig, but it was a drop in the bucket. Cliff and Marjorie offered to pay for one dinner, and Callum? He just shrugged and said, "Thanks, bro," like I'd handed him a soda instead of $1,000 plane ticket. I could have said no. I could have put my foot down and told them we couldn't afford it, that Callum needed to figure his own way. But I didn't. I wanted to see Celeste happy, and she kept saying how this would bring us all closer. I kept telling myself it'd be worth it. Maybe paradise could fix the cracks in our life. Cracks I hadn't even fully admitted were there. Work was steady but draining, and things with Celeste felt off sometimes, like she was pulling away. Callum being around all the time didn't help either. His mess was everywhere, dirty socks on the floor, dishes in the sink. And her parents, always in our space, acting like they ran the place. I figured a change of scenery might reset us all, give us a chance to laugh together again, like we used to. I was desperate to believe it could work. The night before we left, I packed my suitcase, folding shirts and shorts while Celeste buzzed around, double-checking her makeup bag. "You excited?" she asked, glancing at me in the mirror. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Gonna be great." I wanted it to be true. I pictured us all on the beach, me and Celeste holding hands, Cliff and Marjorie sipping cocktails, Callum maybe even cracking a real smile for once. I imagined late-night talks with Celeste under the stars, the kind we hadn't had in a while. I'd been so busy with work, and she'd been distracted, texting someone late at night, saying it was just a client. I didn't push her on it. I trusted her. She was my wife, the woman I'd promised to love forever. And Callum, he was my brother. I'd always looked out for him, even when he made it hard. Her parents? They could be overbearing, sure, but they meant well. At least, that's what I told myself as I zipped up my bag and tried to shake off the unease creeping into my chest. When we got to the airport, everyone was in high spirits. Marjorie kept snapping pictures of the ticket counter, saying, "This is going to be unforgettable." Cliff clapped me on the back, a little too hard, and said, Good man, Grant. Making this happen. Callum just nodded, earbuds in, like he couldn't care less. Celeste squeezed my arm and said, "Thanks for this." "Really?" Her voice was warm, and for a moment, I felt lighter. Maybe I'd been overthinking things. Maybe this trip was exactly what we needed. On the plane, I sat next to her, watching the clouds roll by below us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I breathed in the scent of her shampoo coconut, like always. It felt good, normal. I let myself hope. I let myself think that a week in Hawaii could patch up whatever was fraying between us. I didn't know then that I was walking into a trap, that the people I loved most were already plotting something I'd never see coming. All I knew was that I'd spent everything, money, energy, trust, to give them this, and I was praying it'd be enough. The moment we stepped off the plane and into the warm Hawaiian air, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The flight had been long, and I'd spent most of it trying to keep everyone happy, making sure Marjorie had her extra pillow, grabbing Cliff's bag from the overhead bin, nodding along as Celeste chatted about the resort. Now, standing in the open-air terminal with the smell of flowers everywhere, I thought maybe this could work. We piled into the rental car, a big SUV I'd paid extra for, and drove to the oceanfront resort. It was stunning, white sand stretching out forever, waves crashing gently, palm trees swaying like they were welcoming us. I checked us in, handed out key cards, and hauled everyone's luggage to their rooms. Celeste smiled at me as we walked into ours, the balcony overlooking the water, and said, "This is perfect, Grant." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think we'd finally get a break from the weirdness I'd been feeling back home. But from the second we settled in, something felt off, and I couldn't shake it. It started small. Celeste was different, distant, like her mind was somewhere else. She'd sit by the pool with her sunglasses on, staring out at the ocean, barely talking to me. I'd ask her if she wanted to swim or grab a drink, and she'd just nod or say, maybe later, her voice flat. I told myself she was tired from the trip, that she'd warm up once she relaxed. But then there was Callum. He was always around her, hovering like a shadow. If she went to get a towel, he'd follow. If she sat down with a book, he'd plop right next to her, cracking jokes I couldn't hear from across the deck. I'd watch them from my chair, squinting against the sun, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. They'd always been close. Callum was the charming one, and Celeste liked his energy, but this felt different. Too close. Too constant. I'd catch him leaning in, whispering something, and she'd laugh in a way she hadn't laughed with me in months. My stomach twisted every time, but I'd push it down. He's my brother, I'd think. She's my wife. I'm being stupid. Then there were her parents. Marjorie and Cliff were acting strange too. I'd see them huddled with Celeste, their heads bent together, talking in low voices. Once, by the resort's tiki bar, I walked up to join them, and they stopped mid-sentence, all three turning to look at me like I'd interrupted something. "What's up?" I asked, forcing a grin. Marjorie waved her hand and said, "Oh, just planning tomorrow," but her smile was tight, and Celeste wouldn't meet my eyes. Cliff grunted and sipped his beer, saying nothing. It happened again the next day, whispers by the breakfast buffet, cut off when I got close. I started feeling like an outsider in my own vacation, the one I'd paid for with my own money. I'd sit there, picking at my food, wondering why they were shutting me out. Was it about me? Were they mad I hadn't planned more activities? I couldn't figure it out, but it gnawed at me, this quiet sense that something wasn't right. Dinner that night was when it really hit me. We were all at this fancy restaurant in the resort, the kind with candles on the tables and waiters in crisp white shirts. I was trying to keep things light, tired of the weird vibes. I held up my lei, the flower necklace they'd given us at check-in, and said, "Hey, what if we all wore these tomorrow? Matching family look, right?" I laughed, expecting them to roll their eyes or play along. Instead, Marjorie let out this sharp little chuckle and said, "You'd be the last to know, wouldn't you, Grant?" Her words hung there, heavy, and then Cliff snorted, and Callum smirked, and Celeste just stared at her plate. They all laughed, this private, knowing laugh that didn't include me. I felt my face heat up, my smile slipping. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, keeping my tone light, but nobody answered. The waiter came by with more bread, and the moment passed, but it stuck with me. The last to know about what? It was like they were in on some joke, and I was the punchline. I sat there, pushing my food around, my appetite gone, while they chatted about the beach like nothing happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Celeste said she needed space, her exact words, and grabbed her sandals to go for a walk alone. She stood by the door, her silhouette framed by the moonlight coming through the balcony, and said, "Don't wait up, okay? I just need to clear my head." Her voice was too calm, too smooth, like she'd rehearsed it. I nodded, lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. "Sure," I said, but my mind was racing. Clear her head from what? Me? The trip? Something else? I listened to the door click shut, and then it was just me and the hum of the air conditioner. I tried to relax, to tell myself she was just stressed, but that knot in my gut was back, tighter than ever. I kept replaying the day, the way Callum stuck to her, the whispers with her parents, that laugh at dinner. Her voice echoed in my head, too calm, too planned. I sat up, my heart pounding, and looked out the balcony. The beach was dark, empty except for a few distant figures I couldn't make out. Was she really alone? Or was she meeting someone? I didn't want to think it, but I couldn't stop. Something was wrong, really wrong, and I was starting to feel like the only one who didn't know what it was. By the time she came back, it was past midnight. I pretended to be asleep, my breathing slow and even, while she slipped into bed beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't say a word, just lay there, her back to me. I stayed still, eyes half open, watching the shadows move across the wall. I wanted to ask where she'd been, who she'd been with, but I didn't. I was afraid of the answer, afraid of what it might mean. That night, I realized I wasn't just tired or paranoid. Something was happening, something big, and I was on the outside looking in. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The perfect little vacation I'd hoped for was slipping away, and I was starting to wonder if I'd ever really had it at all. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. Celeste was already up, standing by the mirror in our hotel room, brushing her hair with slow, careful strokes. She was wearing a white sundress I hadn't seen before, simple but elegant, the kind that made her look like she belonged on a magazine cover. "Morning," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes as I sat up in bed. She glanced at me through the mirror and gave a small smile. "Morning. I've got an errand to run today, okay? I won't be long." Her voice was light, casual, but there was something in it that made my stomach twist. An errand? In Hawaii? We were on vacation. What could she possibly need to do? I wanted to ask, but my mouth felt dry, and all I managed was a weak, "Sure, no problem." She nodded, grabbed her purse, and slipped out the door before I could say anything else. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my mind buzzing. Last night's walk, the weird vibes, and now this, it didn't add up. I couldn't just sit there and wonder anymore. I had to know. I waited 10 minutes, long enough for her to get a head start, then pulled on my shorts and a t-shirt. My hands were shaky as I tied my sneakers, my heart thudding like I was about to run a race. I didn't have a plan, just a gut feeling screaming at me to follow her. I grabbed my wallet and headed out, locking the door behind me. Downstairs, I flagged a cab outside the resort, the driver a laid-back guy with a faded baseball cap. "Just follow that white sedan up ahead," I said, pointing to Celeste's rental car pulling out of the lot. He raised an eyebrow but shrugged and started the engine. "Whatever you say, man." We trailed her at a distance, winding through roads lined with green hills and swaying palms. I kept my eyes on her car, my palms sweating against my knees. Where was she going? Why wouldn't she tell me? The cab smelled like old leather and sunscreen, and every bump in the road jolted my nerves. I told myself I was overreacting, that she was probably just picking up something trivial, a gift, a snack, anything innocent. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. After about 15 minutes, her car slowed and turned down a narrow lane. We followed, the scenery shifting to a quieter stretch of coastline. Then I saw it, a small white chapel, tucked between cliffs and trees, its steeple poking up against the blue sky. It looked peaceful, almost postcard perfect, but seeing her park there made my blood run cold. She stepped out, her dress catching the sunlight, and walked inside without looking back. The cab idled a few yards away, and I muttered, "Stop here." The driver nodded, and I handed him a crumpled 20 before climbing out. My legs felt like jelly as I crossed the gravel path, keeping low behind some bushes. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't turn back now. My gut had dragged me this far, and it was yelling at me to keep going. I crept toward the chapel's side entrance, staying out of sight, my sneakers crunching softly on the ground. The air smelled salty and sweet, but all I could focus on was the pounding in my ears. I reached the building and pressed myself against the wall, peering through a cracked window. That's when I saw her, Celeste, standing at the altar, her white dress glowing under the soft light filtering through stained glass. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I thought I'd lost my mind. She looked like a bride. My wife, my Celeste, standing there like it was our wedding day all over again. But then I saw him. Callum. My brother. He was next to her, wearing a white suit, his hair slicked back, a grin on his face I hadn't seen in years. They were holding hands, facing each other, and the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, just stared as my world tilted sideways. The minister stood between them, a small figure in black, his hands raised like he was about to say something. Marjorie and Cliff were there too, sitting in the front pew, smiling like proud parents. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the window frame to steady myself. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a dream, anything but what it looked like. I stayed there, frozen, my mind racing to make sense of it. Was this some kind of surprise? A vow renewal they'd planned for us? But no, that didn't fit. She'd said, errand, not surprise. And Callum, why was he up there, dressed like that, holding her hand? My chest tightened, and I felt sick, the kind of sick that comes from knowing something awful is true but not wanting to admit it. I edged closer to the side door, pushing it open just enough to slip inside. I stayed in the shadows, behind a wooden screen, close enough to see but not be seen. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of flowers and old wood. Celeste's back was to me, her shoulders straight, her voice too quiet to hear. Callum leaned in, his face soft, and I wanted to scream, to run up there and demand answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching my life fall apart, piece by piece, in a tiny chapel I'd never even known existed. It was then that I realized how blind I'd been. All the signs, the whispers, the distance, the way they'd laughed at me last night, it all clicked into place. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. They'd planned it, kept it from me, brought me to Hawaii just to pull this off right under my nose. My wife was standing at an altar with my brother, and her parents were watching like it was the happiest day of their lives. I felt my hands clench into fists, nails digging into my palms, but I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just backed out of the door, slow and quiet, my mind buzzing with a strange, cold clarity. Whatever this was, I'd seen it now. There was no unseeing it. And as I stumbled back into the sunlight, the sound of waves crashing in the distance, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same Grant Holloway anymore. I don't know how I made it back to the shadows outside that chapel without losing it. My legs moved on their own, carrying me away from the side door, back to the bushes where I could still see them through the window. My wife, Celeste, in her white dress, holding hands with my brother, Callum, while her parents sat there grinning like this was some kind of fairy tale. I pressed myself against the rough bark of a palm tree, my breath shallow, my heart slamming against my ribs. I couldn't go back in there, couldn't face them, not yet. But I couldn't leave either. I had to know more, had to hear what they were saying, even if every word was going to rip me apart. So I stayed, hidden, watching like some pathetic ghost at my own funeral. The minister's voice was a low hum, too soft to make out, but then Callum spoke, loud enough for me to catch it through the cracked glass. He doesn't know, right? He asked, his tone nervous, glancing at Celeste. She squeezed his hand and whispered, relax. He's too dumb to notice. My stomach lurched, and I felt bile rise in my throat. Too dumb to notice. That's what she thought of me. Marjorie let out a chuckle from the pew, her voice sharp and clear. Oh, he's too dumb to notice anything, she said, like it was the funniest thing in the world. Cliff nodded, his pipe clenched between his teeth, a smug little smile on his face. Good thing, too, he muttered. Makes this easier. I stood there, gripping the tree so hard my knuckles turned white, their words slicing through me like knives. They weren't just doing this. They were laughing about it. Laughing at me. My wife, my brother, my in-laws, the people I'd trusted with everything were standing in that chapel, planning something behind my back, and I was the idiot who'd paid for the whole trip. The minister kept talking, his hands moving in some kind of blessing, but I couldn't focus on him. All I could hear was Celeste's voice, soft and sure, calling me dumb. All I could see was Callum's hand in hers, the way he looked at her like she was his. My head spun, and for a second, I thought I might pass out, but I didn't. I stayed upright, forcing myself to watch, to listen, to take it all in. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes, maybe an hour. Time didn't make sense anymore. The ceremony seemed to wrap up. The minister stepped back, and Celeste and Callum turned to face Marjorie and Cliff, all of them smiling like they'd just won something. I couldn't hear what they said next, but I didn't need to. I'd seen enough. My wife wasn't just distant, she was gone. My brother wasn't just a freeloader, he was a traitor. And her parents? They weren't family. They were conspirators. I felt a coldness settle over me, like someone had dumped ice water down my spine. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I didn't scream, though my throat burned with it. Instead, I turned and walked away, my steps slow and deliberate, back toward the road where the cab had dropped me off. I didn't call another one right away, just kept walking, the gravel crunching under my feet, the ocean roaring in the distance. My mind was a mess, but one thought kept cutting through the noise. They thought I was too dumb to notice, but I wasn't. Not anymore. By the time I got back to the resort, the sun was high, beating down on my neck. I stopped at a little shop near the entrance, bought a bottle of water, and chugged it, trying to steady myself. My hands were still shaking, but my head was clearing. I couldn't let them know I'd seen them, not yet. If they thought I was dumb, I'd play dumb. I'd smile, laugh, act like nothing was wrong, and figure out what to do next. I walked into the lobby, the cool air hitting my face, and saw Celeste coming back from her errand. She waved at me, her purse swinging on her shoulder, that white dress still on. "Hey," she said, her voice bright. "You okay? You look sweaty." I forced a grin, wiping my forehead. "Yeah, just went for a walk. Hot out there." She nodded, looking relieved, and I realized she had no idea I'd followed her. Good. Let her think I was still clueless. Let them all think it. The rest of the day, I kept up the act. We went to the beach as a group. Me, Celeste, Callum, Marjorie, and Cliff. I carried the cooler, set up the chairs, even splashed around in the waves with Callum like we were kids again. He laughed and shoved me, and I shoved him back, grinning like an idiot while my insides churned. Celeste sat under an umbrella, chatting with her mom, and I caught her watching me a few times, her eyes searching. Did she suspect something? I didn't care. I just kept moving, kept talking, kept pretending. At dinner, I ordered a big plate of fish and made dumb jokes about the sunburn on Cliff's nose. They all laughed, and I laughed too, louder than I needed to. Inside, though, I was replaying that chapel scene over and over, her hand in his, her voice calling me dumb, their smug faces. It fueled me, kept me sharp. I wasn't going to break down. I wasn't going to let them win. That night, lying in bed next to Celeste, I stared at the ceiling while she slept. Her breathing was soft, steady, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't know what they were planning, some kind of fake wedding, a real one, a sick game. But I knew I couldn't trust them anymore. I loved them, all of them, and they'd turned on me. My wife, my brother, my in-laws, they'd made a fool of me, but I wasn't going to stay one. As the fan spun above me, I made a promise to myself. I'd figure this out, and I'd make them pay. Not with yelling or fighting, but with something colder, something smarter. They thought I was too dumb to notice. They were wrong. And soon, they'd find out just how wrong they were. The rest of that Hawaii trip was like living in a fog, but I kept my head above water. After seeing Celeste and Callum in that chapel, hearing her call me dumb, watching her parents laugh about it, I knew I couldn't just go on like nothing happened. But I also couldn't let them see me crack, not yet. So I played along, kept my face blank, my voice steady. We had 2 days left, and I spent them smiling through every meal, snapping pictures by the pool, even suggesting we all go on a boat tour the next morning. Sounds fun, right? I said at breakfast, spreading butter on my toast like my world wasn't falling apart. Celeste nodded, her eyes flicking to mine, and said, "Yeah, let's do it." She looked relieved, like she thought I was still the same old Grant, clueless and happy to tag along. Callum smirked and said, "Sure, bro, I'm in." Marjorie clapped her hands, and Cliff grunted his approval. They had no idea I was watching them, studying every move, every word, waiting for a slip. I'd seen what they were capable of, and now I was biding my time. Underneath it all, I was working. While they swam or napped, I'd slip away to the hotel's business center, a tiny room with a couple of computers and a printer. I'd log in, my fingers shaking as I typed, and start making quiet moves. First, I emailed my buddy Dave from college. He's a private investigator now, works out of Seattle. "Hey, man," I wrote, keeping it vague. "Need some help tracking something. Call me when you can." Then I reached out to my old coworker, Jin, who's good with tech stuff. "Can you look into some accounts for me?" Discreetly, I typed, giving her just enough to go on without spilling everything. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, proof, maybe, or leverage, but I needed people I could trust, people outside their little circle. Every time I sent a message, I'd delete the history, clear the browser, and walk back out like I'd just been checking the weather. Celeste asked once where I'd been, and I shrugged, said, just stretching my legs. She bought it. They all did. Those last 2 days, I watched them closer than ever. Callum stuck to Celeste like glue, always finding some excuse to be near her, grabbing her a drink, adjusting her chair. She didn't push him away, just smiled and let him hover. Marjorie and Cliff kept up their whispers, their heads bent together over coffee or cocktails, glancing at me now and then like I was a problem they'd already solved. I'd catch their eyes and wave, big and dumb, like the Grant they thought I was. Inside, though, I was boiling. Every laugh, every touch between Celeste and Callum, every smug look from her parents, it was fuel. I didn't sleep much those nights. I'd lie next to her, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been planning this, how long they'd all been laughing at me. But I didn't confront her. I didn't storm out. I stayed quiet, cold, focused. The storm was coming, but they wouldn't see it until it hit. When the plane landed back home, I was ready. We'd all flown together, crammed into those tight seats, and I'd kept up the act, chatting about the trip, showing Cliff how to work the in-flight screen, handing Celeste her bag when we got off. They were relaxed, laughing, like everything was normal. I smiled too, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead. As we grabbed our luggage from the carousel, I said, "Hey, I've got to hit the bathroom. Meet you guys at the car." Celeste nodded, and Callum said, "Don't get lost, bro," with that stupid grin of his. I walked away, my duffel over my shoulder, and didn't look back. Instead of the bathroom, I headed straight for the airport exit, flagged a cab, and gave the driver an address, a cheap hotel across town I'd booked from Hawaii. "Step on it," I told him, and he did. I checked in under a fake name, paid cash, and locked myself in a room that smelled like stale cigarettes and bleach. My phone buzzed Celeste, probably wondering where I was, but I turned it off. I didn't need to hear her voice yet. That night, I sat on the lumpy bed, staring out the window at the flickering neon sign across the street. I'd slipped away clean, but I knew they'd figure it out soon. They'd get home, expecting me to pull up any minute, and I wouldn't. I pictured them walking up to our house, the one I'd poured my savings into, the one I'd fixed up for us. They'd be tired from the flight, dragging their bags, still buzzing from their little victory in Hawaii. Celeste would unlock the door, Callum trailing behind her, Marjorie and Cliff complaining about the drive. They'd step inside, flip on the lights, and then they'd see it, or rather, they wouldn't. I'd made sure of that. While they'd been lounging by the pool, I'd called a moving company, friends I trusted, and had everything I cared about pulled out, documents, my computer, the safe in the closet. The house would be a shell when they got there, and I wanted them to feel it, that emptiness, the way I'd felt it in that chapel. I leaned back against the headboard, my hands clasped behind my head, and let myself imagine their faces. They'd freeze, staring at the bare walls, the missing furniture, the silence where my stuff used to be. Celeste would call my name, her voice sharp, then panicked. Callum would swear, pacing the room. Marjorie would clutch her purse, and Cliff would stand there, pipe in hand, trying to figure out what happened. They'd think I'd snapped, maybe, or that I'd run off in some pathetic breakdown. But I hadn't. I was right here, a few miles away, calm and ready. This wasn't the end, it was the start. They'd underestimated me, thought I was too dumb to notice, too weak to fight back. They were wrong, and I was going to prove it. The silence before the storm was over. Now, it was time to let it rain. I didn't sleep much that first night in the hotel, but I didn't need to. My mind was too busy, too alive with what I'd set in motion. I'd spent those last days in Hawaii planning, and now it was all coming together. The house, our house, was the first strike. I'd called my buddy Mike from the resort's business center, a guy I'd known since high school who owned a moving company. "I need everything out," I told him, keeping my voice low. "The important stuff, papers, my desk, the safe. Leave the rest." He didn't ask many questions, just said, "You got it, Grant," and made it happen. By the time Celeste and the others walked through that front door, the place would be hollowed out, a shell of what it used to be. But that wasn't all I'd done. I'd left them something to find, something to make sure they knew I wasn't running away. I was fighting back. I pictured it as I sat on that creaky hotel bed, the cheap lamp flickering beside me, the bare living room, the red paint I'd told Mike to splash across the wall in big, angry letters. I saw everything. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. They'd know exactly what it meant. I'd gone further, too. On the kitchen island, I'd had Mike leave a stack of papers, divorce forms I'd downloaded and filled out, asset transfer notices I'd drafted with Jen's help, and a little black voice recorder labeled "Play Me." That recorder was the real knife. I'd bought it in Hawaii, a cheap thing from a tourist shop, and recorded every word I'd overheard in that chapel. Celeste's, "He's too dumb to notice," Marjorie's laugh, Cliff's smug agreement, all of it. I'd sat in the hotel bathroom the night before we left, the shower running to muffle my voice, and added my own message at the end. "You made me believe you loved me," I said into the mic, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "You made me believe I was enough. But I'm done believing. I'm taking back what's mine." It wasn't perfect, but it was raw, and it was me. When they hit play, they'd hear it all, their betrayal, my pain, and the promise that I wasn't going to let them walk away clean. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the cracked ceiling, and let myself imagine their reactions. Celeste would see the papers first, I figured. She'd drop her bag, her face going pale as she flipped through the divorce forms, my signature already there, cold and final. She'd call out for Callum, her voice sharp, and he'd stumble in, still cocky until he saw the wall. That red paint would hit him like a slap, and I hoped it'd wipe that smirk off his face. Marjorie would clutch her chest, gasping like some old movie star, while Cliff stood there, pipe dangling, trying to process it. Then one of them would spot the recorder. Maybe Celeste would grab it, her fingers trembling as she pressed play. They'd hear her own voice first, that cruel whisper, and I could almost see her eyes widen, her breath catch. Callum would swear under his breath, pacing, while Marjorie and Cliff exchanged looks, realizing their little game was up. My voice at the end would seal it, the quiet, hard edge of it, the words I'd held in for too long. They'd know I'd been there, that I'd seen the chapel, that I wasn't the dumb, trusting Grant they'd counted on. I wanted them to feel trapped, the way I'd felt watching them at that altar. I'd taken other steps, too, before we even left Hawaii. Jen had gotten into our joint accounts, nothing illegal, just using the access I'd given her, and started moving things around. My paycheck was rerouted to a new account I'd set up, one Celeste didn't know about. The emergency fund I'd kept for Marjorie and Cliff, the one they dipped into more times than I could count, was drained and closed. I told Jen, make it look like a glitch for now, and she did. They wouldn't notice until they tried to use it. The house was still in both our names, but I'd already emailed a realtor friend to start the sale process, quietly. No listing yet. I wasn't just leaving them with an empty house, I was cutting them off, piece by piece. Every dollar I'd poured into them, every favor I'd done, I was taking it back. They'd thought I was their bank, their fool. Now they'd see I was something else entirely. Sitting there in that dingy hotel room, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The TV was off, the only sound the hum of traffic outside and the occasional creak of the walls. I didn't need to be there to see their panic. I could feel it from miles away. They'd try to call me, I knew that. My phone was still off, but I could imagine the messages piling up, Celeste's fake concern, Callum's excuses, Marjorie's whining. I wouldn't answer. I didn't need to. The house, the papers, the recorder, they said everything I wanted to say. I'd spent years building a life with them, thinking we were a team, a family. I'd worked overtime to pay the mortgage, fix the leaky roof, driven Callum to job interviews he never showed up for. I'd loved them, trusted them, and they'd turned it all into a joke. But I wasn't laughing anymore. I was done being their punching bag. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark street below. A couple of cars rolled by, headlights cutting through the night. I thought about the wedding portrait that used to hang in our living room, me and Celeste, smiling, young, full of hope. Mike had taken it down, packed it with the rest of my stuff, and I didn't know if I'd ever look at it again. That Grant, the one in the picture, was gone. This Grant, the one standing here, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing, was different. Harder. Smarter. They'd pushed me too far, and now they'd face the consequences. The empty walls and red letters were just the beginning. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was taking back my life, and they were going to feel every step of it. I woke up in that hotel room with the sun sneaking through the blinds, painting thin lines across the stained carpet. My back ached from the lumpy mattress, but my mind was sharp, buzzing with what came next. They'd seen it by now, the empty house, the red paint, the recorder. I could almost hear Celeste's voice cracking as she played my message, feel the weight of their stunned silence. But I wasn't done. That was just the opening move. Now it was time to play the real game, to hit them where it hurt most. I'd spent years letting them take from me money, time, trust, and I'd been too blind to see it. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone, powered it on just long enough to check for a text from my lawyer, Monica Travers. She'd replied late last night. Papers ready. Say the word. I typed back, go, then turned it off again. I didn't need their calls or excuses slowing me down. This was checkmate, and I was holding all the pieces. Monica was a shark, smart, ruthless, and exactly what I needed. I'd met her years ago through a work friend, back when I thought I'd never need a lawyer. Now, she was my weapon. I'd called her from Hawaii, late one night while Celeste slept, and told her everything, the chapel, the betrayal, the money I'd sunk into them. I want out, I said, my voice low over the hum of the hotel AC, and I want them to lose. She didn't flinch, just asked for details and got to work. By the time we landed, she'd drafted notices that would bury them. The first went to Celeste that morning, divorce papers, served at the house by a guy in a cheap suit. I pictured her opening the door, still rattled from the night before, her face falling as she saw my name on the envelope. Inside was a demand for full asset division, no negotiation. She'd signed power of attorney weeks earlier, back when I tricked her into thinking it was for a mortgage renewal. Just some paperwork, babe, I'd said, and she'd scribbled her name without a second look. Now, Monica had used it to freeze her accounts, every penny she thought she had, locked until the courts sorted it out. Cliff and Marjorie got it next. I'd set up that emergency fund for them years ago, a safety net because they were family. They treated it like their personal ATM, dipping in for vacations, car repairs, whatever they wanted. I'd let it slide, thinking I was helping. No more. Jen had drained it before we left Hawaii, and Monica followed up with a notice revoking their access permanently. I imagined Cliff puffing on his pipe, confused, while Marjorie called their bank in a panic, only to hear, "Sorry, ma'am, it's gone." They turned to Celeste, expecting her to fix it, but she'd be too busy clawing at her own mess. Then there was Callum, my brother, the golden boy turned leech. He'd been on probation for a petty theft charge I'd bailed him out of last year, something I never told Celeste. He wasn't supposed to leave the state, but I'd paid for his Hawaii ticket anyway, thinking I was giving him a break. Big mistake. I'd called his probation officer from a burner phone in the hotel, left an anonymous tip, check Callum Holloway's travel records. He's been out of bounds. By now, they'd be knocking on his door, asking questions he couldn't answer. Monica didn't stop there. She filed a fraud investigation against all three, Celeste, Callum, and her parents. The chapel stunt wasn't just a betrayal, it was a scheme. They'd used my money to fund it, plane tickets, the resort, even that white suit Callum wore. Monica argued it was misrepresentation, maybe even embezzlement, since I'd been the bankroll. It was a long shot, but it didn't need to stick. Just tie them up in legal knots for months, drain whatever cash they had left on lawyers they couldn't afford. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, picturing their faces as the notices piled up. Celeste, tearing open envelopes, her hands shaking. Callum, swearing at the phone as his PO called. Marjorie and Cliff, huddled in their kitchen, realizing their cushy life was crumbling. I'd given them everything, my trust, my savings, my home, and they'd thrown it back in my face. Now I was taking it all away. I didn't feel joy, exactly. It wasn't fun watching the people I'd loved crash and burn. But it felt right, like balancing a scale that had been tipped against me too long. I'd spent years being the good guy, working overtime to pay bills, fixing their problems, ignoring the signs. I'd thought that's what family did. You sacrifice, you support. But they didn't see it that way. To them, I was a means to an end, a dumb sap they could milk dry. The chapel proved it, Celeste in that dress, Callum at her side, her parents cheering them on. They'd planned to cut me out, maybe live off my dime while I stayed in the dark. I wondered how long they'd been scheming, weeks, months, years? Every late-night text Celeste sent, every favor Callum asked for, every time Marjorie patted my hand and called me sweet. Was it all a lie? The thought made my chest ache, but I pushed it down. No more pity. No more doubt. They'd made their move, and now it was mine. I stood up, stretched, and grabbed my duffel. I checked out of the hotel that morning, paid cash again, and had a rental car waiting outside. Monica would keep the pressure on more filings, more surprises, but I needed to disappear for a while, let them stew. I'd already lined up a new job, something remote I'd start in a week, far from their reach. As I tossed the coffee cup in the trash, I felt the weight lifting, not all of it, but enough. They thought they'd won in that chapel, thought I'd stay too dumb to notice. But I'd flipped the board, and they were out of moves. Checkmate. I walked out into the sunlight, the car keys dingling in my hand, and for the first time in days, I breathed easy. They'd feel the squeeze soon enough, and I'd be long gone when they did. I didn't stick around to watch them fall, but I didn't need to. I knew it was happening. After I left that hotel, I drove out of town, the rental car humming along the highway, my old life shrinking in the rearview mirror. I turned my phone off for good, tossed it in a dumpster at a gas station, and picked up a cheap prepaid one instead. No more buzzing from Celeste's desperate calls, no more texts from Callum trying to explain, no more voicemails of Marjorie crying about how I'd ruined everything. They'd try to reach me, I was sure of it. They'd bang on my old office door, only to find out I'd quit days ago. They'd drive by the house, hoping I'd show up, but it'd stay empty, the for sale sign going up soon enough. I'd cut every tie, and now I was a ghost to them. Monica was handling the rest, legal notices, account freezes, the fraud case, and I trusted her to keep the pressure on. I didn't need to see their faces to know they were crumbling. I could feel it, and that was enough. The first few days, I kept moving, staying in motels, paying cash, keeping my head down. I'd lie on stiff beds, staring at water-stained ceilings, imagining what was happening back there. Celeste would have tried calling first, her voice shaking as she left messages I'd never hear. "Grant, where are you? We need to talk." She'd think I'd come around, that she could charm her way out of it like always. When I didn't answer, she'd turn to Callum, snapping at him for screwing up their perfect little plan. He'd shrug it off at first, cocky as ever, until his probation officer showed up. I pictured him in cuffs, swearing as they hauled him in for violating terms, unauthorized travel, fake ID papers I'd tipped them off about. He'd blame me, of course, but he'd have no proof, just his own mess to drown in. Marjorie and Cliff would be next, pacing their living room, yelling at each other when the bank told them their fund was gone. How could he do this? Marjorie would wail, while Cliff sat there, pipe cold, realizing they'd pushed me too far. They thought I was their safety net. Now they were falling, and there was nothing to catch them. I heard bits and pieces through Dave, my PI friend. He'd been digging, keeping tabs from a distance, and he'd call my burner with updates. "They're a mess, man," he said a week later, his voice crackling over the line. "Celeste tried hiring a lawyer, but her accounts are locked. She's got nothing to pay with." Word's out about that chapel thing, too. Someone leaked the audio. I didn't ask who, I hadn't told him to do it, but I wasn't surprised. Maybe Jen had spread it, or maybe Monica had slipped it to the right people. Either way, Celeste's reputation was toast. She'd been a rising star in graphic design, freelancing for big clients, but now? Dave said her name was mud. People didn't want to touch her after hearing her laugh about me on that recording. I could see her now, hunched over her laptop, refreshing her inbox for jobs that wouldn't come, her perfect life unraveling thread by thread. Cliff and Marjorie weren't faring much better. Dave told me their old social circle had dropped them. Those fancy dinner parties they loved stopped inviting them once the whispers started. They're living in some rundown condo in Detroit, he said, fighting over who gets the good couch. I almost laughed at that, Marjorie clutching her pearls, Cliff grumbling about his pipe tobacco, stuck in a place they'd never have stepped foot in before. Their retirement was supposed to be cushy, funded by me, but I pulled that rug out from under them. They'd sue each other before they'd sue me. Monica had made sure my tracks were covered. As for Callum, he was back in court, facing jail time. Dave said he tried calling me from a holding cell, begging for help, but the number was dead. I'd bailed him out too many times. Not this time. He dug his hole, and I wasn't climbing in with him. I settled in a small town a few states away, a place with wide streets and quiet nights. I didn't need much, just a cheap apartment, a new job I'd lined up online, teaching basic coding remotely. I kept my head low, didn't talk about my past. The money from the house sale would come soon. Monica was pushing it through, splitting it clean down the middle, but Celeste wouldn't see much after legal fees and debts. I didn't care about the cash, though. I'd already taken what mattered, my freedom, my peace. I'd sit on my tiny balcony at night, sipping a beer, listening to crickets instead of their voices. No more late-night whispers through the walls, no more fake smiles over dinner. The golden family they'd built, the one I'd funded, the one they'd planned to replace me in, was tarnished beyond repair. They thought they could rewrite me out of the story, but I'd burned the book instead. Sometimes, I'd wonder how they were holding up. Celeste, alone in that condo, staring at a phone that didn't ring. Callum, stuck in a cell, cursing my name. Marjorie and Cliff, bickering over scraps, their pride in tatters. I didn't feel sorry for them, not really. They'd chosen this, every step of it. The chapel wasn't a mistake, it was a declaration. They'd wanted me gone, wanted a life without me, and now they had it, just not the way they'd dreamed. I'd given them everything once, my love, my trust, my savings, and they'd thrown it away. So I took it back, piece by piece, until they had nothing left to stand on. The fall was theirs, and I was done catching them. I'd built something new here, something small but mine. And for the first time in years, I felt steady, like the ground wasn't about to give way beneath me. A year later, I'm sitting on the back porch of my little rental house in Denver, the air cool and crisp as the sun dips below the mountains. It's a far cry from the chaos of that old life, the house I shared with Celeste, the constant hum of her parents' voices, Callum's mess scattered across my living room. Here, it's quiet, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. I've built something new, something simple, and it fits me better than that old life ever did. I teach coding at a community college now, working with teens who've had a rough go, dropouts, kids from broken homes, the kind I might have been if I hadn't clawed my way out. They're rough around the edges, but they listen when I talk, and I see myself in their hungry eyes. On weekends, I hike the trails around the city, my boots crunching on dirt paths, the weight of the past slipping off my shoulders with every step. I'm not rich, not flashy, but I'm steady, and that's more than I could say a year ago. The house isn't much, a one-bedroom with a sagging couch and a kitchen that barely fits me, but it's mine. No one drops by uninvited, no one whispers behind my back. I've got a real backyard, patchy grass and all, where I sit with a coffee most mornings, watching the sky lighten. It's funny how little I need now. Back then, I thought I had to keep up, pay for trips, fix everyone's problems, be the guy who never said no. Now, I've got a prepaid phone with maybe 10 contacts, a beat-up truck that gets me around, and a job that pays the bills. I don't miss the big house or the savings I burned through. Those were chains, not treasures, tying me to people who never cared. Here, I'm free, and that's worth more than any bank account. Sometimes I get coffee with Leah, a fellow teacher at the college. She's got dark hair and a laugh that cuts through the quiet, sharp and real in a way Celeste never was. We met during orientation. She teaches math, runs a tutoring program for the same kids I work with. The first time we talked, I was nervous, fumbling my words over a lukewarm latte, but she didn't mind. She's easy to be around, no games, no hidden agendas. We'll sit in this little shop downtown, trading stories about our students or the dumb stuff we did in our 20s. She knows I was married once, doesn't know the whole mess, just that it ended bad and I don't like talking about it. "You're better off," she said once, her eyes soft but sure, and I nodded because she's right. There's no rush with her, no pressure. We're just two people who get along, and that's enough for now. Maybe it'll turn into something, maybe it won't. I'm not chasing anything anymore. I keep one thing from that old life, tucked in a drawer by my bed, my wedding ring. It's a plain silver band, scratched up from years of wear. I don't look at it often, but it's there, a reminder not of Celeste or the love I thought we had, but of the moment I found myself. I remember slipping it off that night in the hotel, my hand steady as I dropped it into my bag. It wasn't about her anymore, it was about me, about waking up from the lie I'd lived. I'd spent so long believing family was blood, that loyalty came with a ring or a last name. But they showed me different. Celeste in that white dress, Callum at her side, her parents cheering, it wasn't just betrayal, it was a lesson. Family isn't what you're born into or marry into. It's trust, honesty, the people who'd never stab you in the back while you're buying their plane tickets. I didn't have that then, but I'm finding it now, piece by piece. The kids I teach are part of that. There's this one boy, Marcus, 16, all attitude and quick hands. He reminds me of Callum before he went off the rails. He showed up late to my first class, slouched in the back like he didn't care, but he stayed after to ask about loops and code. Now he's there every day, building little programs, talking about tech school. I see the spark in him, the same one I had when I started out, and I push him because I know what it's like to need someone to believe in you. The other teachers, Leah, old Mr. Carson with his bad jokes, they're becoming my people too. We'll grab beers after work sometimes, sit in a dive bar with sticky tables, and I'll laugh harder than I have in years. It's small, messy, real, not the polished lie I lived before. I don't need a big circle anymore. A few good ones, that's plenty. I don't know much about what happened to them, Celeste, Callum, her parents. Dave stopped updating me months ago, and I didn't ask. Last I heard, they were scrambling, broken, but I don't check. They're gone from my life, ghosts I don't need to haunt me. If I had to guess, Celeste is still trying to claw back her career, Callum's in and out of trouble, and Marjorie and Cliff are fading into obscurity. They don't matter now. I've got my porch, my hikes, my kids at the college. I've got Leah's laugh and Marcus's quiet thanks when he nails a project. I've got myself, the me I didn't know I could be stronger, sharper, free. If you ask me what family means now, I'll tell you it's not blood or rings or shared roofs. It's trust. It's honesty. It's choosing the people who'd never put on white in secret behind your back. And here, in this little life I've carved out, I've finally found it. It was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, or at least hers. The baby shower was in full swing, hosted in the backyard I'd spent weeks transforming. I'd built the pergola myself, stained the deck, even hung fairy lights that glowed soft and warm, the way she liked them. I thought it was my way of showing her how much I cared, how invested I was in the life we were building together. I'd ordered catering from her favorite place and made sure every detail was perfect. The playlist was one I'd spent hours curating, filled with songs that had marked our journey from our first dance to our honeymoon. The smell of grilled skewers drifted through the air, mingling with the tangy sweetness of lemonade. Every detail felt like a love letter I'd written in wood, wire, and effort. But I was just background noise. She looked so radiant standing there, framed by the string lights. Her white dress hugged her growing belly like an embrace. I remember thinking how beautiful she was, how lucky I was that she was carrying our child. I was the man who built the crib, who painted the nursery in soft hues of green, who assembled the stroller at 2 in the morning because she'd changed her mind about the color. I was the man who worked overtime to make sure every bill was paid, every craving met, every tear soothed. But as she stood to give her toast, her smile turned to someone else. I saw it in the angle of her body, the way her eyes glistened when they landed on him. Bryce. The best friend. The man who'd always been around, always ready to help, always too eager to linger. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to smile. Surely she would thank me. Surely she would acknowledge the man who'd bent himself into knots to make this day, this life, possible. I watched her raise her glass, her lips parting in that practiced way, the way she always rehearsed her lines to perfection. This, she said, her voice warm and honeyed, is the man I wish I had married. The only true father my son will ever know. She didn't look at me. Her eyes never found mine. She held her gaze on Bryce, who shifted in his seat but didn't look away. The guests fell silent. My ears rang. I thought it might be the wind at first, a gust that carried her words away before they could land. But no one moved. No one looked at me. No one stopped her. I stood there, my hand frozen around a plastic cup of cheap lemonade that suddenly tasted like bile. My mouth went dry, but I couldn't speak. I was a ghost at my own celebration. The decorations blurred, the laughter from moments ago evaporating like smoke. I tried to catch her eye, tried to find some sign that she'd meant it as a joke, a slip of the tongue, some misguided attempt at humor. But her smile was steady, her posture defiant. Bryce shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward me for a moment before dropping to his lap. Even he couldn't meet my gaze. I waited for someone, anyone, to stand up, to say something. To remind her that I was the man who'd built this life with her, that I was the man she'd chosen. But the silence stretched. I heard a chair scrape on the deck, the sound cutting through the fog in my head. A soft laugh from someone in the back. A mutter of conversation that carried no sympathy, no acknowledgement of the man who'd spent sleepless nights worrying about hospital bills and car seats and paint samples. My pulse roared in my ears. My legs felt like they were carved from stone. The lemonade trembled in my hand. I thought of the hours I'd spent here, building, planning, loving her. The nights I'd rubbed her back, whispered reassurances, pressed kisses to her forehead when the world felt too heavy. The arguments I'd let go, the humiliations I'd swallowed because I thought that's what a good husband did. I thought of the child she carried, the one I'd been so excited to meet. My son, my heir, the one I'd already pictured taking fishing, teaching to ride a bike, showing how to tie a tie. And in that moment, with her glass raised to another man, I realized I was a placeholder. A wallet. A name on a mortgage. A man who happened to be standing there when she needed a stage. I set the cup down slowly, feeling the sweat of it seep into my palm. I looked at her one last time, memorizing the way the string lights danced in her hair, the way her lips curved around a smile that wasn't meant for me. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. No one called after me. No one asked me where I was going. I could have walked right off the edge of the world and no one would have noticed. The night air hit me like a slap, cool and damp, carrying the laughter and music that still buzzed behind me. My feet found the path through the yard, the one I'd laid stone by stone, every piece carefully placed for her comfort. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. I'd built the road she'd walk him down. I reached the gate, my fingers trembling as they unlatched it. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't need to see the life I'd built crumble in real time. I didn't need to watch her raise that glass again and toast to a future that no longer included me. The night swallowed me whole. I walked down the street, my head pounding with every echo of her words. The man she wished she'd married. The only true father her son would ever know. And I realized then that the happiest day of her life had nothing to do with me. I'd been the set designer, the stagehand, the one who cleaned up after the show was over. But the star of the play had always been Bryce. And now, as the streetlights blurred and the cold wind bit at my skin, I knew I was walking out of a life that was never mine to begin with. What came next? No one saw that coming. Not even me. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I went upstairs and sat in the quiet nursery I had built with my own hands. The smell of fresh paint clung to the air like a stubborn memory, a reminder of the countless evenings I'd spent hunched over a can of pastel green, brush in hand, sweat dripping from my forehead. I had traced every line, sanded every edge, made sure every corner was perfect, every board mine, every screw and nail, driven in with a care that felt like love. I'd done it for our son, the one who was supposed to bring us closer. But none of that mattered anymore. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting my eyes wander over the little details that no one else would notice. The mobile above the crib, with its wooden stars painted the same shade of blue as the ocean at sunrise. The bookshelf with its carefully selected titles, all alphabetized and arranged by age group. The soft, plush rocking chair I'd driven 2 hours to pick up because Celine had mentioned how much she wanted it. All of it felt like a shrine to a life I thought we were building together. But I was the man she tolerated, not celebrated. I sat in that chair, rocking slowly, the creak of the wood a lullaby that reminded me of the nights I dreamed of reading bedtime stories, of teaching our child to count the stars, of sneaking in one last hug before the night light was switched on. I thought of how many times she'd come home late from dinners with friends or work events, her hair smelling of wine and laughter. I'd always been the patient one, the understanding one. I told myself that's what love looked like. Compromise, trust, blind faith in the person you'd promised to stand beside. But that night, her words at the baby shower repeated in my head like a broken record. The man I wish I had married. The only true father my son will ever know. And each time I heard them, the pieces of me that had held this marriage together cracked a little more. I leaned back and let my eyes close, the rocking chair slowing to a gentle sway. My mind drifted through the years we'd spent together. I remembered our wedding day, the way she'd looked in that ivory dress, the promise in her eyes that felt like a lifetime of us. I remembered the first time she'd called me from work crying, and I'd driven across town with takeout and flowers just to make her smile. I remembered the night she told me she was pregnant, how I dropped to my knees in the living room, tears streaming down my face because I'd never felt luckier. I remembered every apology I'd whispered into the darkness. Every time I'd forgiven her because I believed in the version of her that had said, I do. But now, in the quiet of that nursery, I realized she didn't want me. She wanted someone else. She wanted a man who wasn't me, who would always be closer to her heart than I ever could. I let out a slow breath, my chest heavy. I was done being the man who bent himself in half just to make her comfortable. I was done being the husband who painted walls to cover up the cracks. I was done being the provider of all things, but the one thing she clearly didn't want, my love. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in that rocking chair, the same one I'd imagined holding my son in, and I drafted an envelope instead, something final. A goodbye she'd never see coming. A line drawn in ink that couldn't be erased. I reached for the small desk I'd placed in the corner of the nursery, a place where I'd planned to document every milestone, every giggle, every first, with a pride that felt infinite. I opened the top drawer and found the heavy, cream-colored stationery I'd bought for birth announcements. It felt poetic, in a way, to use it for something else, a rebirth of myself, maybe. I grabbed a pen and wrote with a hand steadier than I expected. No shaky lines, no hesitations, just the cold, unwavering truth. Celine, you will never own my silence again. You will never mistake my kindness for weakness. You will never see me as less than the man I am. I paused, letting the ink dry, then folded the letter and placed it in the envelope. I sealed it with a finality that felt like a sigh of relief. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want screaming matches or tears that meant nothing. I wanted peace. I wanted my house, my sanctuary, free from the poison she'd let in. I wanted to reclaim the pieces of me I'd given away too easily. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and went back downstairs. The house was quiet now, the party over, the laughter gone. All that remained were the faint echoes of a celebration that had been nothing but a stage for her betrayal. I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty glasses and the crumpled napkins scattered like confetti. I let my fingers brush over the coffee table I'd built, the one she'd praised a million times but never really saw. It felt like everything else, mine but unnoticed. The night crept in, long and dark, stretching across the windows like a promise of change. I listened to the clock on the wall tick its way to midnight, each second a reminder that tomorrow was coming, ready or not. I was done waiting for someone to choose me. I'd chosen myself, and that would have to be enough. The moonlight spilled across the floor, catching the edges of the envelope in my hand. It glowed like a secret waiting to be told. I knew it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. A declaration that I was more than a placeholder, more than a silent witness to her choices. I was the man who built the nursery, the man who stayed up late when she needed someone to listen, the man who believed in a future that was never really ours. And now I was the man who finally said, enough. I stood and carried the envelope to the kitchen counter, placing it next to the flowers that had begun to wilt in their vase. The baby shower favors, little bottles of lavender-scented lotion, sat unopened, their ribbons already untangling. I straightened one out of habit, then stopped myself. I wasn't here to fix things anymore. I was here to let go. I turned off the lights, leaving the house in darkness. The nursery upstairs waited like a ghost, but it was mine now. And in that darkness, I felt something I hadn't in years, relief. A quiet that wasn't her silence, but mine. A silence I chose. The next morning came with the heavy hush of decisions made. A thin layer of dew clung to the grass, sparkling in the half-light of dawn like scattered tears. I stood at the kitchen counter, the envelope in my hand feeling like a loaded gun. I thought about the words I'd written, the ones that still burned like a brand on my heart. You will never own my silence again. The sentence felt truer than any vow I'd spoken at the altar. I set the envelope down, its cream edges stark against the polished wood. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was more like anticipation, like the moment just before a match meets the paper. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She moved with that familiar rhythm, the way she always had, each step rehearsed, purposeful, like she was choreographing a moment. She came down humming, some pop tune I couldn't name but recognized from the radio. She didn't even glance at me as she walked toward the fridge, her hair tied up in a loose ponytail that revealed the delicate slope of her neck. I used to love that neck. I'd kissed it 1,000 times. Now it felt like the back of a stranger. She opened the fridge, rummaging for orange juice, as if last night had been any other night. As if her words, so sharp, so final, hadn't sliced through my chest. She closed the fridge door and turned. Her eyes landed on the envelope. Her smile faltered, the hum dying in her throat. She reached for it with careful fingers, as if afraid it might bite. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the paper. I watched her read the letter attached to the deed to the house. I'd spent months preparing it. Every signature, every line, every detail. I'd quietly removed her name when things had started to shift, back when her phone would light up with messages from Bryce at all hours, when she'd roll over in bed and say, it's just work. I'd known better then, but I'd stayed quiet. I'd told myself it was easier to trust her than to confront the truth. Now I watched the truth hit her like a slap. Her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks as she realized what she held. I stood there, arms folded, steady. I didn't flinch. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear or maybe disbelief. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. That silence said more than any outburst. She'd been expecting me to break. She'd expected a fight, maybe even tears. But not this. Not cold, hard lines on a piece of paper that told her she had 30 days to leave. You have 30 days, I'd written. For words. For bullets. For iron bars on the prison she'd built for me. Her fingers trembled as she held the letter, the pages crinkling under the pressure. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. Maybe she was. I felt like one. A man who'd given everything, and now had nothing left to give. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. I wondered if she'd spent so long rehearsing her part in this story that she'd forgotten how to improvise. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, wide and cold. I could almost hear the echo of every time she'd told me she loved me, every lie that now lay dead on the floor between us. I thought about all the nights I'd waited for her to come home, the way I convinced myself that the smell of cologne on her clothes was just a mistake, a hug from a friend, an accident. I thought about the times I'd watched her phone light up with Bryce's name, and how she'd always smiled at the screen like he was the sun. I'd believed her when she said he was just a friend. I'd swallowed every bitter pill because I thought that's what love demanded. But now I saw it clearly. I was the man she'd settled for. The one who paid the bills, who built the crib, who made sure the nursery smelled like fresh paint. Bryce was the man she wanted. The man she'd toasted at the baby shower. The one she said should have been her husband. The only true father her son would ever know. I wondered if she'd rehearsed that line in the mirror. If she'd practiced it for him. She folded the letter slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. She set it back on the counter like it was a bomb she didn't want to detonate. Her lips parted. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice hoarse. "I am," I replied. My voice didn't waver. It felt like steel. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. I didn't need her touch to remind me of the years I'd wasted. I didn't need her tears, if they ever came, to make me doubt myself again. I had given her everything. I had rebuilt myself around her so many times I'd forgotten what my own shape looked like. But now, I was done being the man who bent. I was done being the man who apologized for loving her more than she deserved. Her mouth opened again, but nothing came out. That silence, so raw, so complete, was the final proof that she'd never seen me, never understood what I'd built for her, never appreciated the man who'd put his soul into every plank of this house, every stroke of pain in that nursery. She'd expected me to fight, to beg, to crumble, but I wasn't that man anymore. I was the man who'd written the letter. I was the man who'd erased her name from the deed. I was the man who'd found his voice. She left the letter on the counter, her hand lingering on it for a moment, as if hoping the words might change. But they didn't. They never would. I watched her turn and walk away, her steps slower than they'd been on the stairs that morning. She didn't look back. I didn't call her name. The quiet that followed was heavy, but it felt clean, like a wound that finally got to breathe. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I picked up the envelope, running my thumb along the crease she'd made when she'd folded the paper. It felt like a scar, a reminder of what we'd been and what we'd never be again. I set it back on the counter, next to the fading flowers from the baby shower. The petals had started to curl at the edges, their bright colors dimming, their fragrance fading. I wondered if she'd notice. I wondered if she'd care. The sun had risen fully now, its light spilling across the kitchen floor like a promise. I let it warm my face. I felt stronger than I had in years. I had taken back what was mine. My house. My name. My voice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The man she thought would always be there, always forgiving, always folding himself around her needs, he was gone. In his place was a man who'd chosen himself. A man who'd written his own ending. A man who'd said, enough. For years, I'd given Celine everything: money, time, silence. Every time she asked for space, I gave it. Every time she asked for more, I found a way to provide. I'd convinced myself that love meant sacrificing my own needs, that being a good husband meant putting her happiness before my own. I told myself that if I loved her enough, she'd eventually see me. But all those years felt like a lie now, unraveling thread by thread as I sat in my office, the place I'd made my refuge long before I knew I'd need one. The room was lined with old tax documents, invoices, photos of us in happier times. I looked at one. A shot from our honeymoon, her smile so wide, her hair swept up in the wind, and wondered who that woman was and if I'd ever truly known her. I scrolled through old texts on my phone, searching for some clue I'd missed. Every message from Bryce lit up like a warning sign I'd chosen to ignore. Thanks for last night. Couldn't have done it without you. You're a lifesaver. Drinks on me next time. Don't worry, I'll always be here for you. Always. That word stung like a wasp. I'd believed their friendship was harmless, that my jealousy was the problem. I told myself I was being insecure, unreasonable, that she'd never do that to me. She'd always said I was her rock, her safe place. But the truth was she'd built a bridge right over me, and Bryce had walked across it. I remembered all the nights she'd come home late, her hair smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. I'd never said anything, never accused her. I just smiled, asked how her evening was, and pretended that the tightening in my chest was nothing more than tiredness. I believed her excuses about work dinners, about how he was just a friend. I believed her because I wanted to. Because believing her was easier than admitting that I was living in the echo chamber of a marriage built on half-truths. Now, as I sat in the office, the glow of my computer screen casting pale shadows on the walls, I felt like I was finally waking up. I opened the folder I'd been too scared to open before, a folder labeled Receipts. Every time she'd canceled plans at the last minute. Every time Bryce's name had appeared on our credit card statements at restaurants I'd never been invited to. Every time she'd come home wearing that perfume I'd never bought her. I documented it all, not because I wanted to destroy her, but because I needed proof I wasn't crazy. Because somewhere inside me, I'd known all along. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I read through an email she'd sent him. Thank you for understanding me better than anyone else ever has. It felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I tried to remember the last time she'd thanked me for anything. When was the last time she looked at me like I was her partner, her equal? It felt like a distant memory, like a scene from someone else's life. I wondered if she'd ever felt that way about me, or if I'd just been the man who made her life easier. The man who paid the bills and fixed the leaky faucets. The man who didn't ask too many questions. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a stone. I thought about the day she'd met Bryce, how she'd introduced him to me with that bright smile and a laugh that felt rehearsed. This is Bryce, she'd said, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. He's like family. Like family. I should have known then. But I'd let it go, let it slide like I always did. Because I trusted her. Because I'd promised to love her, for better or worse. I just never imagined the worse would look like this. My phone buzzed with a message from an old friend asking if I was okay. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "Yeah, I'm fine." The lie felt easier than explaining the truth. How do you tell someone you've been living a lie? That the woman you thought you'd grow old with had written you out of her story long before you realized you were no longer the hero? I thought about replying with the truth, with the whole messy, humiliating truth. But I didn't. I couldn't. It felt too raw, too real. Instead, I let the message sit there, unread, a monument to the silence I'd accepted for so long. I opened the filing cabinet beside my desk and pulled out the old wedding album. The cover was worn, the corners frayed from too many moves, too many nights when I'd reached for it in the dark to remind myself why I was still here. I flipped through the pages slowly, the images blurring as tears threatened to fall. I saw the smile on her face, the way her hand had rested on my chest, the way she'd looked at me like I was her everything. I remembered the vows we'd written together, how she'd promised to love me in every season, to stand by me through every storm. I wondered if she'd even meant them, or if they were just words she'd learned to say. Words she'd practiced in the mirror like an actress learning her lines. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed silent to keep the peace. The times I'd bitten back the questions because I was afraid of the answers. The times I'd told myself that love was supposed to hurt sometimes. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. A never-ending echo chamber where my own voice got swallowed by hers. Where my needs were background noise. Where my dreams were always second to hers. I closed the album and set it back in the drawer. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the yard I'd built with my own hands. The fence I'd mended, the flower beds I'd planted. The swing set I'd started to build when she told me she was pregnant, before I knew that even the idea of fatherhood would be stolen from me. The sun was setting, the light fading from gold to gray. I pressed my forehead against the glass and let the coolness seep into me. It felt like a reset, like a moment to breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for her to come home. I didn't feel like I needed her to complete the picture. I turned back to the room, my office, my sanctuary. I saw the files on my desk, the receipts, the messages that told the story I'd been too blind to see. And in that moment, I realized I'd been rehearsing for this day all along. Every time she'd called him instead of me. Every time she defended him, but never me. Every time she'd let me believe I was enough, only to toast to another man. It was all practice for the moment I finally said, enough. I picked up my phone and deleted her contact. I didn't need her name glowing on my screen anymore. I didn't need to see her apologies or excuses. I needed silence. I needed space to rebuild myself from the ashes of the man I'd been. The man who'd given everything, who'd sacrificed his own voice for hers. The man who'd been the background music to her main event. And as I stood there, alone in my office, I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifting, a chapter closing. The echo chamber of marriage was gone. And in its place, there was only my own voice, steady and sure. The man I was always meant to be. She packed slowly, thoughtfully, each piece of clothing folded with a precision that felt like she was stalling or maybe savoring, as if waiting for me to change my mind, to rush in and beg her to stay. But I didn't. I stood at the doorway of the bedroom, my bedroom now, and watched her with the detachment of a man who'd run out of tears. The suitcase was half full, her favorite dresses laid carefully on top of each other like pressed flowers, delicate and fragile, a life I once tried so hard to hold together. Her perfume still clung to the room, that sweet floral scent that used to make me weak in the knees. Now it just made me want to open the windows and let the wind sweep the past away. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who knew she'd get what she wanted eventually. Someone who'd grown accustomed to my forgiveness. But I wasn't that man anymore. The man who stood there now is done giving her chances she'd never earned. The man who'd watched her toast another man at a party meant to celebrate our child. The man who'd written her out of his life with 4 words. You have 30 days. I let her pack. Let her believe this was all happening at her pace. In truth, I'd already started reclaiming each room long before she set foot back inside this house. I'd spent hours removing her name from the accounts, signing forms and making calls, reclaiming every piece of this life she'd made me doubt was truly mine. The house was always in my name. The accounts were always in my name. The photos that had lined the walls were gone now, replaced by empty spaces that felt cleaner somehow. Every repair I made, every leaky faucet fixed, every squeaky hinge silenced, felt like a declaration. I live here. This is mine now. I thought about the night she'd stood at the baby shower, her eyes glowing with admiration for Bryce, as if he'd been the hero all along. I thought about the way no one had stopped her, the way her family had cheered and clinked their glasses like it was a punchline at my expense. I'd replayed that moment 1,000 times, the betrayal carved into my bones. But each time I remembered it, I felt less anger and more clarity. I'd been the man who built her dreams, but I was also the man who could tear them down, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. I didn't know her the house I'd built. I didn't know her the name I'd given. She'd already decided whose arms she wanted to run to. I was just giving her the final push out the door. Friends started to text me, asking what happened. Some of them had been at the baby shower, seen the toast, and the silence that followed. Man, are you okay? One text read. Can't believe she said that. Another said, let me know if you need anything. But I didn't answer. I didn't need a PR statement. I didn't need sympathy. I just needed peace. And every time the house creaked at night, every time the wind rattled the windows, I felt that peace settling in like a long-lost friend. That night, I cooked a full dinner, for one. I set the table the way I always had, except this time there was no plate across from mine. No glass waiting for her lipstick to smudge its rim. I lit a single candle, not because I was hoping she'd come back, but because I deserved the quiet elegance of it. I'd spent so long worrying about her, making sure her tastes were met, her preferences catered to, that I'd forgotten how to be alone without feeling lonely. But that night, with the candle flickering and the smell of rosemary chicken filling the kitchen, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. I sat at the head of the table. The place I'd avoided so many nights because it felt too authoritative, too final, and raised a glass of water to the empty seat across from me. To the man who stayed, I whispered. It felt stupid, but it also felt honest. I'd stayed through the lies, the betrayals, the slow erosion of the love I thought was unbreakable. I'd stayed because I believed marriage was about sacrifice. But I was learning slowly, painfully, that some sacrifices aren't noble. Some are just self-betrayal dressed up as devotion. I took a bite of the chicken, savoring the herbs, the salt, the crackle of the skin I'd browned just right. Every flavor felt like a triumph, a simple, necessary pleasure. I'd cooked for her 1,000 times, always checking to make sure it was seasoned the way she liked, always apologizing when it wasn't. Tonight, I didn't care. Tonight, I cooked for me. The meal was perfect, not because she would have approved, but because I finally did. After dinner, I walked through the house, checking each room like a man reclaiming a kingdom he'd let slip away. The nursery was still there, half finished, the walls that pale green she'd chosen. I ran my fingers over the crib I'd built, the edges smooth from hours of sanding. I didn't know if I'd ever have a child now, but I'd built that crib with my hands, my heart, my hope. And that meant something, even if she never saw it. I left the door ajar as I moved to the living room. I took down the last of our photos that night. One by one, I lifted them from the walls, feeling the weight of each moment frozen in glass and wood. The honeymoon photo, the one on the bridge in Venice, came down first. Her smile too wide, too practiced. Mine too small, like I'd already known I didn't belong there. The wedding photo came next. I studied it for a long time, my thumb tracing the edge of her veil, the way her head rested on my shoulder like a burden I'd willingly carried. I wrapped each frame carefully, but not tenderly, setting them in a box labeled for her. They weren't for me anymore. They never really had been. I stacked the boxes in the hallway by the front door. I didn't rush. Every movement felt deliberate, a quiet act of self-respect. I didn't throw things, didn't slam doors. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. My life. My house. My rules. I'd given her too much space already. I'd let her toast another man at my table, in my home, without consequence. Now, the consequence was waiting by the door, neatly labeled, ready to be collected. It felt final. It felt right. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway of the living room, looking out at the darkened street. The world felt quiet, expectant. I felt no rage, no regret, only a profound sense of relief. I'd spent so long trying to fix things that were never mine to fix. Now, finally, I'd given myself permission to stop. And in that pause, that sacred silence, I found something I hadn't felt in years, a calm that belonged only to me. For days later, she came back, with Bryce. The audacity of it hit me like a gust of cold air, sharp and unexpected, but in a way that no longer surprised me. She'd always had a flair for the dramatic, and this was her final act, a show of defiance, or maybe desperation, in the face of a man who no longer bent to her will. They stood on the porch, framed in the doorway I built, the one I'd painted and sanded and leveled so she'd have a beautiful entry to her kingdom. Now it felt like a set piece in a play that had lost its script. She knocked once, then twice, her rhythm hesitant. I opened the door halfway, my body a barricade between them and the home that was now mine. Her eyes met mine, searching for the man who would have once invited them in with a smile and a promise that everything could be worked out. That man was gone. She cleared her throat and gestured behind her with a small, uncertain wave of her hand. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, like the wind through dying leaves. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. "Talk about what?" I asked, and even I was surprised by the calm in my voice. It was the kind of calm that comes after a storm, the kind that feels like a gift earned through suffering. Her eyes darted to Bryce, who shifted from one foot to the other like a child caught somewhere he shouldn't be. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his head ducked just enough to make me think he was ashamed, but not enough to actually apologize. Celine took a breath, her mouth opening and closing like she was rehearsing her lines. She finally settled on the obvious, nodding toward the envelope she clutched in her hand, the one I'd left her days ago. "You can't be serious," she said, the paper trembling between her fingers. This is extreme." I didn't blink. "I am," I said, my tone even, my resolve unshaken. 30 days. It's all there in black and white. Bryce stepped forward then, his hand half raised like a peace offering. "Look, man, I know this is complicated. I know there's a kid on the way." He tried to sound reasonable, like he was the only adult in the room. Like he was doing me a favor by stepping in. Like he hadn't been the one she toasted to in front of everyone we knew, calling him the only true father her son would ever know. I cut him off with a stare that could have split wood. "You already said you'd be the father. Act like it." My voice was low, but the venom in it was unmistakable. I watched his face pale as the words sank in, his eyes darting to Celine like he was looking for a script that no longer existed. Celine flinched. The truth landed harder than she expected. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was seeing a man she'd never met. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe the man she'd known had been a shadow of the one standing here now. This version of me who no longer gave her the benefit of the doubt, who no longer gave her free passes just because I'd once believed her smile meant everything. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Maybe they were stuck in her throat. Maybe they'd never existed at all. I didn't care anymore. The silence that fell between us felt cleaner than any explanation she could offer. Bryce cleared his throat, shifting his weight again, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "Think about the baby," he tried, the last card he had to play. Like my love for a child she'd made me question would be enough to make me fold. I stepped back just enough to let the light from the hallway hit my face. I said, and I'll do what's right. But that doesn't mean letting you or her pretend this is still your home. I leaned in then, close enough for him to smell the months of anger I'd buried. You don't get to be the hero here. You're the man she toasted at my table, remember? You wanted this, now you own it. He didn't have an answer. His mouth opened, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Celine reached for his arm, but he pulled back, her touch too heavy in that moment. Maybe he realized then that she'd dragged him into something she couldn't control. Or maybe he saw what I saw, a woman who'd played too many games for too long with too many hearts. I shut the door before she could respond. The click of the latch felt final, like the last period in a long, painful story. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the tremor in my fingers. Not from fear, but from relief. I'd done what needed to be done. I'd faced them both, unflinching, and walked away with my dignity intact. I turned and walked down the hall, each step lighter than the last. The house felt different now, like it had exhaled a breath it had been holding for too long. The walls didn't echo with her laughter anymore. The rooms didn't smell like her perfume. It felt like mine again, a home I could rebuild, brick by brick, with hands that no longer trembled at the thought of losing her. I passed the nursery door and paused, my fingers grazing the frame. I thought about the plans we'd made, the bedtime stories, the first steps, the way we'd promised each other that we'd build a life worth remembering. But the promises had been hers, not mine. She'd made them for show, for the illusion of a family she never intended to honor. I'd believed them because I'd wanted to. Because I'd thought love meant never questioning the person you chose to spend your life with. But love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. Love wasn't supposed to feel like a noose around your neck. I turned away from the nursery and headed back to the living room. The boxes were still there, waiting by the door. Her things, her memories, her lies. I didn't need them anymore. She could come get them, or I'd drop them off on the curb. Either way, they weren't staying here. Not in the house I'd bled for, the house I'd rebuilt from the ground up with hands that knew the price of loyalty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a peace settle over me, quiet and steady. I was done waiting for apologies that would never come. I was done giving second chances to people who'd never earned them. I was done being the man she'd left behind. I was the man who'd survived. And that was enough. In the quiet that followed, I reclaimed the silence like a man finding his own voice for the first time. The house felt different still, but not empty. It was a different kind of silence, one that didn't carry the weight of unsaid words or the tension of waiting for footsteps that never arrived. This silence was mine. It was the sound of a chapter closing, the final punctuation on a story I'd outgrown. I walked through each room with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Every step felt like a declaration. I'm still here. And now, I choose me. I started with the boxes, hers, not mine. I stacked them in the living room like a wall between my past and my future. Each box was labeled in my own handwriting. Clothes, shoes, keepsakes, trinkets. Even the nursery things had been carefully folded and packed. I'd labeled them too. Baby's things, returned to Celine. I'd left nothing behind for her to cling to, no loose ends for her to use as leverage. She'd made her choice, and now I'd made mine. There would be no confusion about where we stood. Then I turned my attention to the nursery. The smell of baby powder and fresh paint still lingered, like a ghost of the life I'd once imagined. I opened the closet, the tiny clothes still on their hangers, tags untouched. The mobile above the crib swayed gently, the wooden stars and moons spinning as if searching for a lullaby that had never come. I felt a pang, something between grief and release. I'd built this room with the hope that it would be a haven for the life we'd created together. But now it felt like a tomb for a dream that never belonged to me. I started boxing things up. Onesies, tiny socks, the stuffed bear with a bow tie that she'd insisted on buying even before the baby was real. Every item folded with the same care I'd used to build the crib, each one marked with a label. I didn't want her to say I'd stolen anything from her or from the baby. I didn't want there to be any doubts. I wanted her to see that I was the man who'd done everything right, even in the end. Every box I taped shut felt like closing a wound. I wasn't packing away memories. I was packing away lies. Once the nursery was stripped bare, I sat on the floor in the middle of that empty room. The walls, once a soft green, now looked harsh and sterile in the afternoon light. I let the quiet fill the space, feeling the echoes of a life I tried so hard to build. I thought about all the nights I'd sat in that rocking chair, imagining a baby's laughter, a family that felt real. I thought about all the times I'd planned for the future without realizing she'd already written me out of it. The pain was there, raw and insistent, but beneath it was a clarity I hadn't known I needed. I didn't owe her any more pieces of myself. I didn't owe her explanations or apologies. I owed myself the chance to start over. I stood up and moved to the closet. Inside, I found a shoebox of old letters, her letters, notes she'd left on the fridge, cards she'd given me for birthdays and anniversaries. I read a few lines, each one ringing hollow now, like a song I'd heard too many times to believe anymore. You're my rock. I can't imagine my life without you. I'm so lucky to have you. Each sentence felt like a paper cut, small, but stinging all the same. I put the letters back in the box, sealed it with tape, and carried it to the living room to join the others. I'd let her decide what to do with those words. They weren't mine anymore. In their place, I turned the nursery into an office. I carried in the old oak desk from the guest room and set it by the window, where the sunlight streamed in like a promise. I unpacked my laptop, my files, my notebooks. I filled the shelves with my books, some on woodworking, some on finance, some on anything but her. Every item that went onto those shelves felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I hung a small clock on the wall and watched the second hand tick, each movement a reminder that time only moved forward, that I could move forward, too. I opened a fresh notebook and started to write, not a letter to her, not a list of grievances, but plans, dreams that were mine alone. A list of things I'd put on hold while I'd been busy holding her together. I wrote about the business I'd always wanted to start, the trips I'd never taken, the classes I'd wanted to take. I wrote about the father I still wanted to be one day, maybe not now, maybe not soon, but someday. I wrote about the kind of man I wanted to be, honest, whole, unafraid of silence. A man who didn't bend to fit someone else's idea of love. A man who didn't accept scraps of affection just to feel like he mattered. When I finished, I signed the bottom of the page with my name, as if sealing a contract with myself. No one else's signature was needed. No one else's approval. This was my life now, and I'd stopped waiting for her to tell me it was okay to live it. I placed the notebook on the desk and took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs in a way it hadn't in years. It felt like the first honest breath I'd taken since the day I said, I do. I left the boxes by the door, stacked neatly with a new envelope on top. Collect your things. Or don't. Either way, this chapter is closed. The words felt final, resolute, the kind of statement I'd never had the courage to make before. I didn't need her response. I didn't need her permission. This was my story now, and I was done letting her write the ending. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a candle in my new office. The flame flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. I watched it burn, the light warm and steady, a symbol of the man I'd become. Not the man she'd needed, but the man I'd always wanted to be. A man who'd finally learned that some things, some people, were never meant to stay. And that letting go wasn't giving up. It was the first step toward becoming whole again. She returned alone this time. No Bryce. Just her. She stood at the door like a shadow from a life I'd left behind, clutching her hands together like a child who'd lost her way home. I watched her from the window, her head bent, her hair falling around her face like a curtain to hide behind. For a moment, I felt a flicker of old instinct, rush to her, ask what was wrong, pull her inside and tell her it would all be okay. But I didn't move. I let her stand there in the dying light, let her own her silence for the first time. When I finally opened the door, the evening air felt cold on my skin, a reminder of the distance I'd built between us. She looked up, her eyes red, her lips trembling. I wondered if the tears were real or rehearsed. Do you still love me? She whispered, her voice so small it could have broken if I tried to hold it. A question that once would have crushed me. Now it felt like the final test, the last lie she wanted to believe. No, I answered truthfully. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't catch in my throat. It just existed, strong and sure, like a bridge that no longer needed repairs. I loved someone I thought you were. The words felt clean, like water running over old wounds. I let them hang between us, let them cut as sharply as her toast at the baby shower had cut me. She looked away, a flush of shame, or maybe regret, crossing her face. I didn't mean it like that, she said, her fingers knotting together. twisting the truth like a towel she couldn't wring dry. You know that. It was just she paused, searching for an excuse that would make it all go away. I was just trying to. I don't know. Thank him for everything he's done. I stared at her, remembering every time she'd praised him, every time she'd defended him while I stood in the background, the placeholder husband. I know, I said. That's what hurts the most. Because she hadn't just thanked him, she'd elevated him. She'd handed him the title of the only true father her son would ever know, like I was a footnote in her story. Like I was the afterthought she'd settle for if her real hero didn't show up. She blinked, her tears finally falling, darkening the neckline of her blouse. I wondered if they were for me or for the story she'd told herself about us. I never wanted it to be like this, she said, her voice trembling now. I never wanted to hurt you. But she had. Again and again. With every late night, every secret message, every laugh shared with him that she'd never shared with me. With every moment, she'd chosen him over me. I could see it in the way she avoided my gaze now, like she couldn't bear the reflection of who she'd become. And maybe she couldn't. Maybe that was her punishment, to live with the knowledge that I no longer needed her forgiveness, that I no longer needed her to make me whole. She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine for a spark of the man who would have taken her back without question. I know I messed up, she whispered. I know I was wrong, but I still want us to be a family. I still want her voice cracked, the last word lost in the wind. I shook my head, my resolve firm. Some things, once broken, don't get glued back together, I said. Especially when the glue is always one-sided. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her explanations. I didn't need to be the man who carried her guilt so she wouldn't have to. That chapter was over. She looked at the boxes stacked by the door. Her things. Her memories. The pieces of the life she'd chosen to leave behind. She reached for one of them, her fingers brushing the tape, but she didn't lift it. Do you hate me? She asked, her voice barely more than a breath. I met her eyes. No, I said, but I don't love you either. And that's the difference. I could see the tears well up again, the realization that she'd lost something she couldn't name, something she'd never really understood. She'd lost the man who would have stayed, the man who would have forgiven, the man who would have rebuilt every broken bridge, no matter how many times she'd set it on fire. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. Some wounds don't need apologies. Some truths stand on their own. She nodded once, slowly, her shoulders sagging like the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. Okay, she said. I understand. But I wasn't sure she did. I wasn't sure she ever would. She picked up one box, then another, stacking them carefully like she was afraid to disturb the dust of what we'd been. She didn't look back as she carried them to her car, the same car I'd helped her pick out, the one I'd taught her to drive when she was too nervous to go alone. Each step she took felt like a final goodbye. The sound of the trunk closing was like a door slamming shut in a house I'd already left. When she came back for the last box, she paused at the doorway, her eyes lingering on the space that had once been ours. I watched her, my arms crossed over my chest, feeling no urge to help her, no urge to reach for her. She stood there like she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. And maybe that was for the best. Because sometimes silence is the only answer that makes sense. She turned and left, her footsteps soft on the porch I'd built with hands that had once believed in forever. I didn't watch her drive away. I didn't need to. I'd watched her leave 100 times before, in every look she'd given him, in every lie she'd told me. This was just the first time I'd let her do it without me standing at the door, hoping she'd turn around. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, the quiet of the house settling around me like a blanket I'd earned. The boxes were gone. The lies were gone. The woman I'd once loved was gone, too. And in that empty space, I found something I hadn't known I was missing: peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from compromise, but the sturdy kind that comes from choosing yourself. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for her to come back. I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. I felt like a man standing on solid ground, ready to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's choices but my own. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and walked back through the house that felt like mine again. Every step was a promise to myself. Every breath was a reminder that I'd survived. And that was enough. The cradle I had carved for our son still sat in the workshop, a quiet testament to everything I had once believed in. I hadn't planned on finishing it, but the day after she left for good, I found myself drawn to it like a magnet. The room smelled of sawdust and old varnish, the scent comforting in its familiarity. I ran my hand over the raw wood, feeling every groove and imperfection, the places I'd meant to smooth, to perfect. But now, I didn't bother. I let the edges stay sharp, the corners remain rough. I wanted it honest, unfinished, just like the life it was supposed to hold. I worked on it for hours, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, catching the floating dust like tiny stars. Each stroke of the sandpaper was a conversation with the man I'd been, the man who'd believed in forever, the man who'd trusted her without question. That man had carved every inch of that cradle with love, with hope, with the belief that it would hold something more than a child. It would hold a promise. But promises were fragile. Promises were easier to break than wood. I didn't put her name on it. I didn't carve our son's name on it, either. I'd always thought I'd paint his name in big, bright letters, a proud declaration of the family we'd built. But now it felt wrong, like it would be a lie. Because that family, the one I thought we had been built on sand, washed away the moment she'd lifted that glass to Bryce and toasted him as the only true father her son would ever know. I'd been the man with the hammer and nails, the man with the dreams, but not the man she'd wanted. And now, every swing of the mallet, every chisel mark, felt like reclaiming the parts of me I'd given away. My friend Andre stopped by late that afternoon. I'd known him since college, back when we'd both been too young and too full of ourselves to imagine life could hurt this way. He'd called earlier, asked if I was okay, and I'd told him I was. But he came anyway. Andre always knew when a man needed someone, even if he didn't say it out loud. He stepped into the workshop without knocking, his eyes sweeping over the room like he was taking an inventory of my pain. He was the only one who hadn't texted me with empty platitudes. He was the only one who knew that sometimes you just need someone to stand beside you while you figure it out yourself. He stood by the cradle, his hands in his pockets, his gaze steady. "For your son?" he asked, his voice low, the kind of tone men use when they're afraid the wrong words might break you. I didn't look at him at first. I just kept sanding, my hands moving in slow, deliberate circles. Finally, I nodded, but the answer felt more complicated than that. I set the sandpaper down and met his eyes. "For me," I said, "to remind me what I built, even when I wasn't seen." Andre didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, his eyes taking in the cradle, the unfinished edges, the way the wood still held the shape of my hands. He understood. He'd seen the way I'd bent myself around her needs, the way I'd become the background to her main event. He'd warned me, more than once, that love shouldn't feel like a competition you never get to win. I hadn't listened then, but I was listening now. We stood there for a long time, the quiet settling around us like a blanket. The sun dipped lower, painting the walls in gold and gray. Andre finally spoke, his voice steady. "You don't owe her a damn thing," he said. "You don't owe him either. But you owe yourself the chance to start over. Don't let that cradle be the end of the story." He clapped me on the shoulder, solid and warm, and in that simple gesture, I felt a piece of me come back together. The part that remembered who I was before her, before the lies, before the toast that ended everything. I looked at the cradle, the way it rocked slightly on the uneven floor. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was mine. Every inch of it carried the story of the man who had believed in a family, who had given everything he had to build it. And even if the family didn't last, the man who built it did. I was still here. I was still standing. And that had to count for something. Andre left after a while, promising to come by again, to check on me. I knew he would. He was that kind of friend, the kind who shows up when everyone else fades into the background. After he left, I sat on the workshop stool and stared at the cradle. I let the memories come, the nights I'd spent tracing the design on paper, the afternoons I'd spent choosing the perfect wood, the evenings I'd stood in that nursery with a smile on my face, imagining a baby's laughter. Those memories didn't hurt as much now. They felt like old scars, reminders of who I'd been, of the man I'd fought so hard to be. The man who'd built something with his own hands, even if it never got to hold what it was meant to. I stood up and ran my hand over the cradle one last time. I didn't need to finish it. I didn't need to sand it smooth or paint it blue or write a name on it. It was enough that I built it. It was enough that I tried. The rest was out of my hands. I carried it to the far wall and set it down gently. It rocked once, then settled. I felt a strange sense of closure in that movement, like the final breath of a story that didn't need an ending. As I left the workshop, the night air wrapped around me, cool and steady. I felt the weight of the silence I'd earned, the the space I'd fought for. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was honest. It was real, and it was mine. I turned off the light, the workshop fading into darkness behind me. The cradle stood there, a testament to the man who'd never stopped trying. The man who learned that sometimes, the most important things you build are the ones that remind you of who you are, even if no one else ever sees them. The 30 days passed with no phone calls, no texts, no begging, just silence. It was a silence I had craved for years, a quiet I'd always mistaken for emptiness. But now it felt like freedom. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt clean, airy, alive in a way it hadn't since before the day she'd turned our marriage into a stage play and handed the final bow to Bryce. I stood by the window that morning, a cup of coffee in hand, the steam rising like a promise that things could start over. The sun was rising across the fence I'd repaired alone, its light stretching over the yard like a benediction. I thought about that toast, how her words had landed like a bomb, how no one had looked at me, how I'd walked out unnoticed. I thought about the night I'd sat in the nursery, drafting that letter that would cut her out of the house and my life for good. I thought about every box I'd labeled, every nail I'd pounded, every account I'd closed. And I realized something. I'd spent so much time worrying about her, about what she wanted, about what I wasn't for her, that I'd forgotten to ask what I was for me. I'd been the man who always said yes. Yes to late-night phone calls, yes to helping her with Bryce, yes to being the background player in her spotlight. But now I was the man who finally said no. And that made all the difference. I sipped my coffee slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my chest, into the place that had felt cold for so long. The taste was rich, honest, like every choice I'd made since the day she walked out. The house felt different now. The echo of her footsteps was gone. The air felt new, as if it had been scrubbed clean of her perfume, her laughter, the ghost of her apologies. I'd repainted the nursery, turned it into an office where I could breathe. The cradle I'd built sat in the corner of the workshop, unfinished and perfect in its imperfection, a reminder that sometimes things didn't go the way you planned. And that was okay, because some things weren't meant to be finished. Some things were meant to teach you how to let go. The friends who'd stayed in my life, like Andre, had texted now and then, asking if I wanted to go out for a drink or come over for a game night. I'd said yes a few times and no a few others. I was learning that it was okay to choose myself, that the world didn't end if I decided I didn't want to talk about it, that the world didn't end if I decided I didn't want to share every detail of my pain, that the world didn't end if I chose silence over explanation. I set the empty cup down and stood at the window, watching the light shift across the yard. The fence I'd repaired, the one she'd wanted me to paint white, but I'd chosen natural wood instead, stood tall and straight. It looked stronger than it ever had. I felt that way too. Stronger. Whole. Not because I'd won some battle, but because I'd stopped fighting for something that was never mine to begin with. I thought about her sometimes, where she might be, what she might be doing. I wondered if she was with Bryce now, living the life she'd so publicly claimed she wanted. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't there. And that was enough. I was here, in the home I'd built, surrounded by the choices I'd made for myself. I didn't need her to see me. I didn't need her to understand. I didn't need her at all. I turned away from the window and took a deep breath. The house felt like mine again, each room a space I'd earned with every tear I'd shed, every lie I'd uncovered, every truth I'd finally learned to speak. I'd been the man who always said yes, the man who bent himself in half to fit her mold. But now I was the man who finally said no. And in that no, I found a peace that tasted like freedom. I found the man I was always meant to be. And that was enough.